Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our host and our guest for today. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast, our survivor stories and journeys and healing. We are so excited to have you continue on this path. I, of course, am Katie Koestner, the executive director at Take Back the Night, and also a survivor myself, having appeared on the cover of Time magazine way back when I was 18 years old, and still doing this amazing, incredible work to try and change policies and laws and find more ways and modalities that we can support survivors in their journey. As I always like to say, please take excellent good care of yourself as you listen. If at any point you need to push pause, come back, get a breath of fresh air, eat a piece of chocolate, whatever self-care you want is always respected and appreciated, because this healing journey has to be your own. We are here to support you. And I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, S7E Mangan. Did I say that right? S7E Mangan? Mangan. I was going to say Mangan, but I don't know. That's a cool name. I've never heard of it. But so S7E has been a trauma expert and consultant for 16 years, working with individuals who have experienced the highest levels of abuse and trauma, including but not limited to sexual violence, complex PTSD, human sex trafficking, domestic violence, substance abuse, child and adult sexual abuse, children, adolescent, adults, and elderly, populations, like all of them. My goodness, S7E. S7E is passionate about helping individuals lead a life of healing and resiliency through trauma-informed lens. She has recently been working at the macro level through the nonprofit Healing Tree. It's called Healing Tree, FYI, and provides consulting services to film and arts professionals, assisting in ensuring their projects are trauma-informed and appropriate for their audiences and all the viewers. She also provides consulting for organizations seeking to bring in a trauma expert that identifies strengths, areas of growth needed, best hiring practices, ways to apply trauma-informed business practices, staff development, and workshops to educate the employees and their employers on how to address the demands of their jobs and vicarious trauma they might be experiencing as a result of the job. My goodness, S7E, that is a lot of stuff. You've packed a lot into 16 years, so I can't wait for our listeners to hear all the different things you're involved with. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up and where did you go to school, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Like you said, my name is S7E Mangan. I grew up, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I have a brother and a sister and a mom and dad. And when I was younger, we moved to Florida, and when I was about 2 years old. And then for the majority of my adolescence, young childhood into adolescence until I turned 18 and went to college, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Pretty much for my entire life, I think I thought I was going to be an architect. And I loved art, and I do some art stuff on the side. I have a calligraphy business on the side as well. And that's kind of been my outlet as a mental health therapist and a trauma expert, that, when I'm not helping people, I help people in other ways through my calligraphy work. But I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to college at University of Kentucky and got my bachelor's in psychology and my master's in rehabilitation counseling. And the reason I decided I didn't want to be an architect was I thought, I really love talking to people. Throughout my entire life, everybody in my family always came to me and they would always talk with me. And they always said I was a very good listener. I always gave very sound, unbiased advice. Even, like elders in my family would come to me and they're like, you should really talk to people for your life. And so when I got to college, I tried to do the architecture program at UK and decided, you know what, why am I spending my hours staying up in studios all night long? And I'm exhausted. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to move over to the very next building. And that was a psychology wing. And I think my parents were kind of like, why did you make this shift? This has nothing to do with architecture. But it was the best decision that I really ever made. I went through my bachelor's and my master's at UK. And then right off the bat out of my career, I started working in a methadone and a Suboxone clinic in a really small town it was in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about what not to do as a mental health therapist, about what was best practice, ethical stuff. But I was learning as we were all kind of now in the world understanding the opioid pandemic and all of those things. So right when I was doing that was right in the time when the laws started to change about Oxycontin and oxycodone prescriptions. And so we're seeing a huge influx of methadone and Suboxone treatment. So for various reasons of it was very far from my home at the time and I had a young child, a first-time mom, I decided that I would do in-home services for at-risk youth. And so after I left the methadone and Suboxone clinic, I started working, doing what they call a wraparound service model for kids who essentially were at risk of being removed from their home and going to a more restrictive level of care. And these were those kiddos that had the highest levels of abuse and trauma, whether that was something they experienced in the home or somewhere else. And so I would go into the schools and I would go into the home, work with the families, and I would take them out into the community and work with them with their social groups and different things like that. I would go to court and help the judges understand what the families needed to try to keep the families together as best as possible.
Hi, this is Katie Koestner, and I wanted to remind all of our listeners about the free National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline. We at Take Back the Night have assembled an incredible team of attorneys, trauma-informed, who truly believe survivors and want to support their journeys in healing and finding justice. The Get Justice Hotline is 567-SHATTER, or feel free to fill out a form on the Take Back the Night website, share your story, let the attorneys know what's going on, and they will get back to you as soon as possible with all of your legal options. That is a service we are delighted to provide through Take Back the Night. Let's back up just a little bit. I loved hearing more about how you, people would find you helpful to speak with, and changing from one career to another mid-college is not unusual.
Right.
I guess, learning about trauma and, a lot of perhaps, abuse starting with the substance use. I just actually spoke with another guest that was their same history, like how they came into this movement. When I want to keep the focus on, survivorship around sexual violence. So could you back up maybe and talk about when did you start and how were you working with those who had experienced sexual abuse or rape or assault? Like, just go back in time a little bit to some of those. Like, where did that start happening for you?
Honestly, it really started happening as soon as I got out of college and I started working at the methadone and Suboxone clinic. When I started diving into the stories with my clients about their trauma histories and how they got started to using substances, very, very frequently we found that they had trauma histories, they had sexual violence histories, and so they were using drugs to cope with that. And so it really started from the very beginning. And I think for me, I was kind of ignorant coming out of school and not really realizing that it could be any way that someone was coping with, what they had been through, that their outlet after surviving that trauma could have been substance abuse, or it could have been, something completely different. But, I really started seeing it right then and there outside of
And
college.
did you notice anything in common about, like, I'm sure your brain's always going. So what were you noticing specifically that was either helpful or a pathway to the drug use from sexual violence? I mean, not every survivor turns to drug use, but what
Sure.
kinds of things, or was it, there were no patterns? Like, were there any commonalities? Was it multi-level, like trauma had happened many, many times, or anything you could share with us would be, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really multiple levels. I don't think that there's really a um, one common theme or even a few common themes.
Mm.
You see sometimes our brains really handle trauma very differently, right? So if you have trauma that happens prior to age 5 versus trauma that happens post age 5, when our ego states are kind of set, I think that makes a difference. But I think there was one common theme that I would say, aside from it being multi-layered, that um, a lot of the people that I worked with, their parents did drugs with them to get them to be more compliant into engaging in sexual activity. And they were victims of rape and sexual violence. And that was something that I saw a lot of. Um, but yeah, I mean, it really kind of happens for a lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Mm. And did any of, I mean, when you were doing this work, what kinds of things were you doing to help or support or interact with? Was it, yeah, what did that look like?
Yeah, to be truly frank with you, it was so young in my career that coming out of school, I wasn't really equipped with the evidence-based modalities like I am now. Now I'm trained in EMDR and brain spotting and techniques of IFS and ego state therapy. But back then, I think what helped the most was letting them have space where they could come safely to talk about it, and finding things that they could do that didn't require them to be under the influence of a substance,
Mm.
that brought them some joy. That was something that was really impactful for a lot of people, even if it was just like playing their guitar. I can remember specifically one specific person I worked with, that every time they played their guitar, they didn't like playing while under the influence. And so really capturing and honing in on that was what kind of helped them, get out of that loop, going back and relapsing and staying with the program.
Oh, that sounds really promising. So, if our listeners are hearing kind of this is find, I guess I'm reiterating, but it sounds like when you could attach someone to an activity, especially like doing something that they found, pleasurable, like unburdened with trauma,
Yes,
and they could do it in a
absolutely.
sober way. That was a pathway to, was it a pathway to healing or just becoming drug free, or both?
I would say both, because I think a lot of the clients that I worked with felt like their whole life was no longer able to be pulled out of those ashes that they were in, that their identity was kind of lost. So when they found that one thing that they could just start, even if it was just 5 minutes, or sometimes it was 45 seconds that they used that thing, it was they were creating a kind of a new self identity outside of using drugs or using some sort of a substance that was mind altering, that gave them that capacity to escape from the trauma. And so I would say, this week or the next 2 days, 5 minutes, set a timer, and just try it. 45 seconds if you can't get to 5 minutes. Maybe it's then you work up to a minute and a half, then you work up to 3 minutes, and surely, slowly but surely, you would see they would come back in and say, "Hey, I made it an hour this week." And I was like, "Wow, that was an hour drug free," you know?
Yeah, right. Everything has to be celebrated in the smallest amounts. I think that's so powerful. And even when, people get triggered or activated, if you might say that word instead, and how do we calm ourselves or bring ourselves back? That so maybe we can get into more. So you did this work, and then it sounds like you did more different things. How
Hmm.
did you go from there to the Healing Tree Project, or was there an interstitial step?
Yeah, so there were several actually steps. I did the in-home service work for at youth children and their families who were in the court system, and then I did private practice for about 5 years, and then I did residential work for the most severely traumatized youth in Kentucky in a residential facility, and that's when I got involved with Healing Tree.
Okay. Okay. So when you say residential work, I don't know. That's a term I'm not sure that everybody knows. And what does that mean?
Sure. So there's a what they call a PRTF program. It's a psychiatric residential treatment facility, and here in Kentucky, there's only one of them that was. They have them for boys and they have them for girls. This particular one was for females. 18 of them. They have experienced the highest levels of abuse and neglect in the state, and so they are housed there behind locked doors because they aren't able to be in the general population in the community because their impairments and their struggles that they're dealing with from their traumas leave them unable to be out in the community. And so they're there and they come from a hospital setting. A lot of them are foster care and adoptive kids, sometimes not. But essentially working with them, and they would typically stay there about anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years and get some very intense trauma therapy, working with the families, working with who might be adopting them or fostering them so that they can go to a less restrictive level of care. And that is when I worked with Healing Tree after that. I got trained through EMDR through one of their programs and saw the impact of that with those females in that residential program. And that's kind of how I got started in that.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's Katie Koestner. Just a quick interruption. We want you to know that there is an entire shop full of cool merch on the Take Back the Night website to support your own healing journey, that of someone you care about. There are t-shirts, there's bracelets, there's glow-in-the-dark stuff. There's all kinds of unique special edition from our artist series as well. So please take a look. If it's a holiday or a special occasion or just a gift to yourself, support Take Back the Night through your purchase. The journey we're taking is with the survivor listeners and their supporters. So if you had to, we've talked a lot about different modalities of healing. What have you seen in your practice to be highly effective, and for whom? Like, meaning, obviously, we have male
Sure.
survivors, female, non-gender binary. We have folks who, come from different cultural backgrounds, religious, like, what could you share about any of those various, types of healing? And then, did you notice any difference when it was a male versus a female, or someone who is black versus white, or anything at all? Like, the more specific, the more
Abs-
helpful.
Absolutely. So I've been trained in several different modalities. And the one that I have found that across the board does not discriminate against gender, race, ethnicity, cultural background, religious affiliation, non religious affiliation. The one that I have found that is the most successful and has the quickest results and has the evidence to support true healing at the core of the brain is actually EMDR, and it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Um, the amount of turnaround that I have seen for clients of mine who otherwise would have never been able to graduate high school or never been able to find a job or never been able to go to college, by doing EMDR, that was the modality where insurance companies started going, wait a minute here. This is the modality that you used with this client. And now, they went from not being able to get off the floor to now they're graduating high school, they're going to college, they're judges and lawyers and teachers and chefs and, parents who have their children, and they have successful careers now. So EMDR is really the one that I think it doesn't discriminate against who the survivor is, who the person who's experienced the trauma is. It completely can do magical things, truly.
Okay. And can you give us a little more description of what's involved with the therapy? Like how many sessions, or is it
Sure.
ongoing? Is it, what does
Yeah.
a session look like and how many do you need?
Yeah, absolutely. So sessions can really vary because as humans, we all have level of distress tolerance, right? We all are able to um, handle so much of distress in one moment. And so it's kind of a phase system, EMDR is. And the first phase is where the therapist and the client, they understand kind of the psychoeducation piece of EMDR, where, in the beginning, truthfully, when I got trained in it, I thought it was kind of taboo. I was like, what is this witchcraft? There's no way that this is as effective as everybody talks about. And I was very skeptical. And so it's very important for the therapist to give the client education about how it works. But and explaining kind of bilateral stimulation, that it is focusing on touching on both parts of the brain to help the client regulate while they're working through their trauma. And so that's the first phase. The second phase is grounding and resourcing. This is the phase that clients typically get stuck in the most, because it requires the client to kind of master this phase where they learn grounding and resourcing to where it's maybe a calm, safe space, where maybe it is some breath work, maybe it is they call container, where we kind of compartmentalize just temporarily from what we're kind of going through, not shoving it out, not looking at it, but just temporarily until we are in a good place that we can open that container and say, okay, this is what I need to kind of work on. But once the client has been able to master that phase 2, then the phase 3 through the next 5 phases is all reprocessing. And what EMDR does is it takes target memories matched with the negative cognitions we experience and have with ourselves, like maybe it is I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I should have known better. And we take whatever that negative cognition is and we tie it and we go, wow, when was the first time I had that thought? When was the most recent time I had that thought? And when was the first time that I had that thought? And sometimes we also ask the client, when's the time you felt that the worst in your life? And so as a therapist for the clients, we're kind of measuring with them, and it's a journey you go on with the therapist, kind of your level of distress that you're experiencing when you have that memory and that negative cognition. And what the EMDR does is it helps you get to the root of that trauma to help yourself kind of work through that negative cognition. And ultimately, you kind of go down this path where it leads you to being able to resolve it so that you aren't having the symptoms of what you have left over once you've experienced your trauma. Like you might not have panic attacks anymore. You might be able to go to that social engagement, right? And so as far as frequency, it depends on how good you can get and how well you can master that phase 2 grounding. That, some people, maybe it is they want to be able to go to their religious building that they go and they practice their religion. Some people, it's they want to be able to go on a first date. Some people, it's they want to take up a new skill. Some people, it's they're working through significant complex trauma that they've got. So everyone is a little bit different. The more work they put into it, the quicker and less frequent sessions that they need. And then typically, what we see is that anywhere from like 6 to 10 sessions, you can get some really good work done with some complex PTSD, really significant trauma, where you feel, I would say, anywhere from 50 to 75% of relief.
Wow, that is incredible, Stephanie. And I'm glad you talked about it in more detail. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to take the journey on the Dear Survivor podcast. A quick note, we are 100% volunteer at the podcast and at Take Back the Night. Your donations, your generosity helps us do what we do on such a shoestring budget. And we would be so grateful if this show is helping you through your journey and you are passing it along to others you care about. Please visit the Take Back the Night website and donate and support our cause and our mission to end sexual violence and support survivors. Thank you. Is this your number one then recommendation for survivors to try? And do you have a second choice?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it definitely is my number one. My number two would be brain spotting, mixed with some internal family systems. But brain spotting, I would think, would be number two. Brain spotting is actually very much like EMDR. But the difference is that sometimes EMDR can be clients report a little bit more activating for them versus brain spotting is a little bit more passive. It seems a little bit slower in the sense of you may not have as much of a physical reaction when you are doing brain spotting. People seem to report that it's a little bit less intense. And so the sessions and the number of frequency that you might need might be a little bit longer with brain spotting, but it might just be less intense for the client. And I think it's important for your viewers and listeners to know that a therapist who's trained in EMDR and brain spotting, we have to go through the modality as clients ourselves to know what it's like in the chair of the client. So we have to have it done to us to learn how to do it. So what's really beautiful about working with somebody who is in the chair of the client is, as a therapist, we know what it feels like to dig into those memories. And most of us who are therapists or trauma experts, we got to this place because we went through something ourselves, and that's myself included. And so it's really a beautiful relationship these two modalities can have with clients. But I would definitely say brain spotting is my number two. It's just like EMDR in a lot of capacities, but it's not as activating for the client with just as great success.
Amazing. So I guess maybe the last section of our interview, it'd be really interesting to hear about the work you're doing with, I guess it was, you mentioned films and companies and organizations. Is there anything specific that you've done in that consulting capacity around sexual violence and trauma?
A lot of, I would say the one specifically, what it would be is that when I'm working with organizations, so a lot of the work that I do is going into organizations where the employers and the employees are experienced vicarious trauma, kind of that secondary trauma from the people they're trying to help. So it's those working with the healers, right? Is that they're being kind of secondarily traumatized by what their clients that they're serving is going through, and helping them being able to understand how to take care of themselves, how to hire the right kind of people, how to make sure that the culture is appropriate, to make sure that, how do you provide support for the staff there, and how do you develop them so that they aren't inherently, maybe they got into that work because they experienced sexual violence or they experienced trauma of some sort. And so they say, I want to help other people, but they didn't do their healing work themselves. So I go into these organizations and these companies and kind of help them understand, what their strengths are and where they need to grow so that they're healthy and they're trauma informed, also informed about themselves and what they've been through, and help them get connected with resources for themselves so they can be healthy, but then also how do they help the people who they're working with as well. As far as the films and um, the arts partnership, I haven't done anything as far as sexual violence, more so just like reading scripts, making sure they're trauma informed, that they're not going to be traumatizing to or triggering to the audiences that they're um, broadcasting to. Some of those have had some sexual violence scenes in them, but it hasn't been primarily focused on sexual violence.
Hmm. So I guess then my next question, Stephanie, is what's next? Are you working on any new projects? Are you staying really busy with the work that you're doing at the Healing Tree? Um,
Yeah, that's a great question. I really live my life by, I really just want to make the most impact by what I'm doing. And so I think if I were to truly pick a path to go down solely, I think what would be next is I'd really love to expand my work more with my trauma consulting and the organizations, because I think that there is a lot of cultures where there that sexual violence and sexual harassment in the workplace, and there is not a lot of help for those people, and people understanding that they they can have functioning um, um, I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say. Um, they can function in their lives and have happiness, and they can have growth, and they can be successful in their lives. And organizations sometimes don't understand that the people that work for them aren't robots.
mm,
That they have emotions, they have feelings, and those impact their jobs. And so just helping kind of restructure those things, and then making sure that the cultures are safe and trauma informed as well. I've really enjoyed being able to go into organizations and do that. So that might be the next step forward.
um, Stephanie, the one last question, I guess, is you were very clear about all the work, but didn't really like if you had one more story or example that's inspiring, that could give our listeners some like hope and like, wow, that sounds incredible how it worked for this without naming a name or an institution. Is there a story that you could share that would bring some
Yeah,
hope? And yeah, go ahead.
absolutely. I worked with a client at one point who um, essentially insurance and every um, treatment facility in the country said that they were too far gone, that there was no hope for them, that I should just wash my hands of them, and that mental health treatment was not going to work, and that they were going to be institutionalized, which is a term that I don't like, but that was the term that they used the rest of their life. And that was when um, shortly after I got trained in EMDR. And uh, this client had had 3 or 4 different therapists who um, threw their hands up and said, "There's no hope for this client." And so I remember sitting down, and my boss said, Would you like to try?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so, in a matter of um, 4 months, with weekly therapy, utilizing EMDR, um, this client was attending school daily where they had not been attending school daily. They stopped being hospitalized for crisis stabilization. They they actually ended up graduating high school early. They ended up getting into college, and now they have passed their lawyer bar, and they are a lawyer. And That's, I would say, probably the story that I will always go back to, and why every single person that we encounter, there is hope with every single person. And so I encourage your viewers, do not give up. Don't give up that even if you have to go through 5 therapists, even if you have to go through 10, when you find the one that can do the work with you and you make that connection, someone who knows what they're doing, and you put in that work, it you can see it on the other side. You can see the success. It is always possible. I don't believe that anybody is too far gone.
Oh my goodness, that's so heartening. Thanks, Stephanie. And I hope that I think my one thought is it's hard to find someone who's the right fit sometimes
Mm-hmm.
a therapist, but I like that, there's no magic number of tries. There's unlimited
Nope.
tries. So
Yeah.
fantastic.
And everybody's personality is different, right? And every therapist has a different style, and every client needs therapy to work a little bit differently. And so trying to find that match is really important, just like you would trying to find that match in a relationship.
For sure. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
No, I don't think so, unless you have anything else that you feel like would
No.
be beneficial.
Yeah, well, I just think the personal stories and the hope and, what has worked and been successful. You gave us, even the example of trying to find an activity that you can find joyful, to steer clear of, the rabbit hole of sinking and getting mired in bad habits, not perhaps some of the worst are drug addictions, but there's plenty of awful habits out there that can come from trying to cope with our trauma. So thank you for the hope and all the great work you're doing. I'm so glad to hear how many places are receptive to being mindful and really thinking about, as you said, everyone's a human. They're not automatons. And,
Mm-hmm.
and all of us are survivors everywhere, including in all of our workplaces. So in
Absolutely.
all of our classrooms and, everywhere there's people, there's those who've been through quite a bit. So thank you for bringing all of your good work to our show, and take care. And I know we can learn more about the healing tree on your website, and we'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, just one more little, way to find a path to your healing. Hopefully there was something Stephanie shared today that will just spark your imagination or give you courage to try one more time. I love how Stephanie closed with, there's no lost cause. There's always tomorrow. There's always another foot forward. So thank you, Stephanie, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone, come back for another session and continue to journal or reach out to our legal hotline if you are ready to take some legal action. The hotline and the intake form are on the Take Back the Night website. So that is always free and always available. So take care and keep going. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.